Hello, my name is Sarah and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a end of July wrap up. I read 12 books between mid-July and the end of July, so these are those books. I just wanted to start out with some stats. I do keep track of a lot of stats. Most of the time I don't look until the end of the year, but I thought it would be interesting to look at them today. So over the complete month of July, I read 10,787 pages across 28 books, which I think might be my best reading month ever. I normally have a hard time reading 25 books, so 28, amazing for me. And out of those 28 books, 9 of them were 5 stars, 9 of them were 4 stars, 8 of them were 3 stars, and only 2 of them were 2 stars. I don't normally give out 1-star ratings, mostly because I have to absolutely hate that book to give out that low of a rating. Let's just get on to the books. The first book I'm going to talk about in this video is The Girl from Everywhere by Heidi Haling. I rated this book a 3 out of 5 stars. This book follows Nyx, and she is on her dad's all-black pirate ship, and they can travel through time using maps, and they are going back to Hawaii to figure out what happened to Nyx's mother. This book was just alright for me. It's written by a native Hawaiian author, which I think is amazing because its own voices representation. But at the same time, there was things that were added to Hawaiian culture that didn't make sense to me. Like in this book, they say that the Terracotta Army is in Hawaii, and they might have been talking about a different one, but as far as I know, the Terracotta Army is from Chinese culture. So I was just very confused as to why the author would add stuff to her culture instead of just using really interesting things that are already existing. I am unhauling this book, but I am planning on reading the sequel as well. Just because I have it, might as well read it. And it wasn't horrible, it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. The next book I read as a buddy read with my friend Heidi, I'll leave her Instagram linked down below, and that is Blood Countess by Lana Popovic. This is a retelling of the queen that we call Bloody Mary, and this book was really bloody, but it wasn't as dark as I thought it was going to be. Because of that, I rated it a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed the main character and how she kind of just fell for Elizabeth's manipulation and became so infatuated with her that she would do anything for her. And you could see the descent to madness, and I thought it was really interesting that the main character would at one moment be like, well, I don't want to do this, and at the same time be like, well, Elizabeth wants me to, so I have to do it because Elizabeth wants me to. And I am really looking forward to the sequel. I'm hoping it gets darker because that would be amazing. And the next book I read is Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. I also rated this 4 stars. This book follows a girl in rural Japan whose mother is terminally ill and her father is really poor. Her and her sister get sold to 2 different houses. The main character we follow gets sold to a geisha house, and her sister gets sold to a prostitution house. I thought this was very informative about the differences between geisha and prostitutes, because it is a common misconception that geishas are prostitutes. I went into this book expecting to cry over it, but it didn't quite make me that emotional, which is why it is a 4 and not a 5. I really felt for the main character because she went through so much and she just tried her best, and people were always there trying to knock her down and tell her she's not good enough, and it just was really sad to see. This is a modern day classic, and I can understand why it is. It just is a shame that it's written by a white guy. The next book I read is The Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty, and this is the 3rd and final book in the Daevabad trilogy, and this book killed me. I cried so hard reading this book. It is just perfection. You don't know what this series is about. This follows Nari, and she is a thief and a healer, and she accidentally summons a djinn during a festival, and it follows her adventures with that djinn and figuring out what her ancestry is. I just found out that The City of Brass is a gender-bent retelling of Aladdin, and I can see that, and it makes perfect sense as to why I loved it so much, because Aladdin is my favorite Disney movie. My heart just breaks for these characters, and it is so amazing to see them grow throughout all 3 books. It just further proves that desert fantasy is my favorite subgenre. I don't want to say too much about this because it is the 3rd book, but please read The City of Brass. It is amazing and you will love it. The next book I read is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and I rated this a 2 out of 5 stars. I read this in high school and I had gone around telling everybody that it was my favorite book, and I'm really embarrassed by past me because this book just isn't what I remember it being. This book follows a woman who got pregnant and had a child, but her husband is across the ocean in England and she is in Puritan, Massachusetts. And it follows her getting shunned by her community because she's labeled an adulteress, and it follows her and her daughter living through this and living through the complete hatred and death threats that she gets. And it just is really unfortunate that women were treated like this, but at the same time we get different points of views in this book and they all agree that they shouldn't be acting like this towards her. And I understand that it's because of their religious beliefs, but it just is disappointing to see that. I don't think this book aged well at all, and the big reveal as to who the father is just made me so angry. I probably will never reread this book, but I got this beautiful edition of it, so I'm going to keep it. The next book I read is The Stars and the Blackness Between Them by Junauda Petrus. I rated this book a 5 out of 5 stars. This book follows two girls, Audrey and Mabel. Audrey is from Trinidad and Mabel's from Minneapolis. Audrey gets caught with her secret girlfriend by her mother and gets sent to the United States to live with her father, where she rekindles her friendship with Mabel. This book made me feel all the feels, and I love both characters with my entire heart. I went into this book not knowing too much about it, just that it is a queer love story, and I think that you should do the same because this book tore me apart. I would say to look up trigger warnings if you need to, because there is some tough subject matter in this book. I enjoyed this book a lot and the cover is absolutely beautiful. Next book is a bit of a throwback, and that is Graduation Day by Joelle Carbonell. This is the third and final book in the Testing trilogy, and I really enjoyed the first book, but as the books went on, it kind of just went downhill. The first book really reminded me of a mix between The Hunger Games and Divergent. This series takes place in a dystopian world where kids from outer sectors are sent to the capital to go to school and learn things, bring back to their community. And the main character in this book wants to be a politician, but she gets tangled up in a lot of shit. The first book was definitely my favorite, and this book was only a 3 out of 5. This book just dragged on far too long, and that just really ruined the book for me. Next, I read Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi, and I rated this a 5 out of 5 stars. I loved this book so much. I just heard really great things about this book, so when I saw it at a used bookstore for $2, I bought it, not expecting to love it as much as I did. This book follows Penny, and she just moves away from home for the first time to college. She finds her roommate's uncle, Sam, having a panic attack, and she helps him and calms him down and gives him her number as his emergency contact, and it follows their friendship afterwards. If this book had come out when I was in high school, I would have been so in love with Sam because he is just so wholesome and amazing. I love him with my entire heart, and he bakes. What else do I need to say about him? This is another book I would recommend looking up the trigger warnings if you need them. There is some tough topics that they talk about in this book. I love this book so much that I stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning just to finish it, and then I ordered Mary H.K. Choi's other book, Permanent Record, right before I went to bed because it was just so amazing that I need to read more by her. The next book I read is Burn by Patrick Ness, and I also rated this a 5 out of 5 stars. I really love Patrick Ness's writing. I've loved everything I've ever read by him, and this book is no different. This book follows Sarah, who is mixed race in the 50s, and she lives on a farm in Seattle, and her father hires a dragon to help tame the land. I went into this book not knowing too much about it, and I do recommend that as well because this book was just a wild ride the entire time. Sarah is romantically involved in the only other non-white kid in her town, and he is Japanese, and it just hurt my heart what these two characters had to go through because it is the 50s and they do experience a lot of racism. So do keep that in mind if you are sensitive to those topics. But I will say that their race isn't the main focus of the story. It's mostly about the dragons. And this cover is one of my favorite covers of all time. It's just so beautiful. Next, I read Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri. This is another desert fantasy, and this follows a girl who is the daughter of a governor, but she also is the daughter of a tribal woman who can use their blood for dealing with the spirits that roam the land. This book was a 4 out of 5 stars. It just wasn't exactly what I was expecting, because I went into this expecting to absolutely love it, and I did have a really hard time getting through this book. It feels like not much happens throughout majority of it, and the romance in it kind of feels like it just happens overnight, even though they're together throughout the entire book. I am really looking forward to reading the sequel to this. Even though I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, I am still really invested in the main character. Next, I read On Writing by Stephen King, and this is his nonfiction book on kind of how to write and also kind of an autobiography. I rated this book a 3 out of 5 stars because I feel like it didn't really add much for my knowledge. I did read a lot of this in one of my high school English classes, so it was good to go back and reread them and remember what we talked about in class. But at the same time, I feel like I didn't learn anything new about writing in general or about Stephen King, so it kind of was just an okay book. And the last book that I read in July is Arusha and the Song of Death by Roshni Chokshi, and I rated this book a 4 out of 5 stars. This first book in the series follows Aru, where she lights a lantern as a dare from her classmates, and it follows her trying to stop the end of the world. This book wasn't as good as the first, which is why it's a 4, but I still really loved it. Aru is still growing as a person, and she is making new friendships, and it's really awesome to see all of the mythology from this book because I'm not too familiar with Indian myths, so this is really informative in that aspect. This book made me laugh out loud so many times, and I really love all of the characters that were added in this story, and I'm really looking forward to reading the next book. So that was everything I read in July. Let me know in a comment below what your favorite book that you read in July was, and I hope you have a great day. See you next time.